Welcome back to another explainer. Look at any world map and your eyes might just gloss over this tiny, tiny sliver of water separating Spain from Morocco. It's the Strait of Gibraltar. And at its absolutely narrowest point, Europe and Africa are separated by a mere 14 kilometers. Seriously, you can literally stand at the Mirador del Estrecho in Spain and clearly see the Jebel Musa mountain right across the water in Morocco. Yet, in all of human history, no one has ever built a bridge or a tunnel to connect these two massive continents. So today, we're diving into the geographical anomaly of this 14-kilometer gap, and we're going to unpack an epic engineering mystery that has baffled the greatest minds on the planet.
What is truly absurd about this situation is the distance itself, 14 kilometers. To put that into perspective, that is actually shorter than the drive from Mumbai to Navi Mumbai. I mean, without traffic, you could comfortably drive that distance in about 30 minutes. If a bridge or tunnel existed here, you could travel between Europe and Africa in half an hour. Think about it. China recently built the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, which is 4 times longer than this gap, and they did it in just 9 years. So why on earth is a 14-kilometer stretch of water seemingly impossible to conquer?
And look, it is definitely not for a lack of motivation. The global stakes involved here are absolutely massive. This tiny choke point isn't just some local crossing. 50% of all global trade and 33% of the world's oil and gas pass right through this strait. Even more staggering, the European Union relies on this exact route for 80% of its merchandise trade. We're talking electronics, raw materials, cars, you name it. About 100,000 ships and 18,000 oil tankers squeeze through here every single year. The whole world desperately wants, and frankly needs, this physical link built. Just to really hammer home the engineering irony here, consider this. Humanity has already conquered vastly more intimidating distances. The famous Gotthard Base Tunnel under the Swiss Alps, that stretches for 57 kilometers right through solid mountain, and it cost 11 billion euros. And the Channel Tunnel connecting the UK and France is 50 kilometers long and was completed in just 6 years. In fact, the top engineering firms who worked on the Swiss Alps have actually been contracted for this Gibraltar project, yet they hit a total brick wall. Now, humans have actually been obsessing over crossing this strait for over a century. Let's get into Section 1, History's Craziest Mega Project, Project Atlantropa. Way back in 1920, a daring German architect named Hermann Sergel didn't just want to build a bridge. The guy wanted to build a supercontinent. His idea was to construct a massive hydroelectric dam right across the Strait of Gibraltar to literally drain the Mediterranean Sea, lowering its water level by about 660 feet. The goal here was to reclaim submerged coastal land and physically fuse Europe and Africa together into an entirely new landmass he called Atlantropa. For decades, he relentlessly lobbied the League of Nations and European governments. Well, as you can probably guess, Project Atlantropa had some pretty fatal flaws. First off, it wasn't just one dam. The plan required 7 massive dams across places like the Turkey-Greece border and between Sicily and Tunisia, just to manage the water. And what about ships passing into the Red Sea, which would now be at a much higher water level? Sergel proposed a massive expansion of the Suez Canal using Panama-style lock chambers to raise and lower the ships. Ultimately, the unpredictable ecological destruction, the sheer multi-billion-dollar cost just for testing it, and a total lack of 1920s technology doomed the project. The grand vision died with Sergel in 1952. Turns out, taming this specific body of water requires far more than just wild ambition. Which brings us to the hard science. Section 2, Nature's Unbreakable Barriers, the Monster in the Strait. So the real culprit here is a scientific phenomenon called upwelling. The Strait of Gibraltar is a massive choke point. On one side, you have the warm, lighter waters of the Mediterranean Sea. On the other, you have the cold, dense, melting ice waters of the Atlantic Ocean rushing in. When these two entirely different densities and temperatures collide, the warm water aggressively rises, while the cold water sinks. This creates violent, entirely unpredictable convection currents. It basically turns the water into countless invisible underwater tornadoes. And honestly, the surface environment is absolutely brutal too. The surface currents whip around at a minimum of 11 kilometers per hour. Add in fierce winds that can reach 108 kilometers per hour, and it's chaos. Back in the 1990s, during the Sea of Nautilus and Pollux survey missions, ships tried to drop anchor just to map the ocean floor. They literally couldn't stay still. When the Pollux tried to drill just 5 meters into the seabed, the intense currents caused the ship to vibrate so violently that the drilling rod snapped in half, and they had to instantly abort the whole mission. But wait, because it actually gets worse. The contrast here is mind-blowing. When engineers finally mapped the shortest 14-kilometer path, known as the canyon route, they realized standard tunneling is utterly useless here. The English Channel's deepest point is only about 180 meters down, but the canyon route, it drops to a staggering depth of over 800 meters. To really wrap your head around that 800-meter drop, imagine taking the Eiffel Tower. Now stack a second one right on top of it. Now stack a third one. That is how deep this water is. If you wanted to build a traditional bridge here, every single pillar holding it up would need to be 3 Eiffel Towers tall, built entirely underwater, all while getting battered by 108 km/h winds. It's just financially and physically impossible. And believe it or not, the depth is just one of 5 geological nightmares on the canyon route. Aside from being 800 meters down, the seabed is filled with deep trenches of breccia and clay. Breccia is incredibly porous and weak. It is essentially soft, wet mud mixed with pebbles. You cannot anchor a massive bridge pillar into soft mud. It would instantly collapse. Then, right underneath that soft mud is a layer of impenetrable hard rock that snaps modern drills. Add in the fact that any bridge needs a 70-meter height clearance above the water for giant aircraft carriers and container ships to pass beneath it, and you've got an engineer's absolute worst nightmare. But the 5th nightmare? That is the absolute deal breaker. The fault line factor. Right beneath the strait, the Eurasian and African continental plates are constantly grinding against each other. This is a highly active seismic zone. In fact, this exact friction point is what caused the infamous Lisbon earthquake that killed an estimated 60,000 people. If you try to build a bridge across 2 different grinding tectonic plates in soft clay, even a mild tremor would make the entire multi-billion-dollar structure collapse like a house of cards. Now, people still tried to get incredibly creative. A visionary American architect named Eugene Suey proposed this wild $10 billion sci-fi solution. To completely bypass the deep, muddy floor, he designed a floating bridge modeled after a fish's spine. It would start in Spain, dive down into a 2-mile underwater tunnel so massive ships could pass right over it, and then emerge in the middle of the ocean onto a massive 3-mile-wide artificial floating island, complete with waterfalls and wind farms. It was brilliant for sure, but ultimately sidelined because an even better, far more practical geographical discovery was about to be made. Which brings us to the climax of this whole engineering journey. Section 3, Engineering a Workaround, the Threshold Route. So in 2005, a research ship named Kingfisher 05 made a historic discovery just by looking a little bit further west. They mapped out what's known as the Threshold Route. Step 1 is abandoning that impossible 14-kilometer path entirely and moving west, where the route is twice as long, 28 kilometers, but the water is only 300 meters deep. Step 2 involves drilling through clay layers that are significantly shallower, completely avoiding the deepest hard rock. And Step 3 is the finalized plan, building a 3-tunnel system. This features a central service line for repairs and 2 outer tunnels for railway tracks directly linking Spain and Morocco. And the payoff for this workaround is absolutely huge. Once completed, this 28-kilometer rail tunnel would slash the travel time from Casablanca to Madrid from 12 grueling hours down to just 5.5 hours. The economic upside is massive, revolutionizing both the speed and the sheer volume at which goods can be traded between the continents. By 2006, the plan was totally locked in, a Swiss firm had won the contract, and work was officially slated to begin in 2008. But right when the engineering was finally solved, the project hit a completely different kind of barrier. Section 4, the ultimate geopolitical roadblock, human nature. Literally, just as construction was supposed to kick off, the complex historical relationship between Spain and Morocco flared up, leading to a massive breakdown in diplomatic trust. See, even though Morocco gained independence from Spain in 1956, deep geographical tensions remained. In 2008, the exact year the tunnel was supposed to begin, the King of Spain visited disputed territories on the Moroccan coast. In retaliation, Morocco recalled its ambassador, and the project was instantly frozen. The ice did begin to thaw over the next decade, but then in 2020, Spain allowed a Western Sahara rebel leader into their country for medical treatment. Morocco viewed this as supporting a rebellion, and boom, the tunnel project was thrown right back into the freezer. So the core of that 2008 dispute really centers around 2 very specific territories, Ceuta and Melilla. These are 2 Spanish-controlled enclaves located directly on the North African coast, bordering Morocco, very close to the opening of the Gibraltar Strait. Spain maintained control of them after 1956, citing the presence of Christian populations that would become minorities. However, Morocco heavily disputes this, claiming the land as its own. Because these enclaves represent massive strategic vantage points, decades of disagreement over this exact border acts as a permanent wedge, repeatedly paralyzing the megaproject. But you know what's really fascinating? The entire world is watching this bilateral friction with growing impatience. Global powers, including the US, the UK, China, India, and the entire European Union, are heavily pressuring both Spain and Morocco to get this tunnel built. Remember, a massive chunk of the global economy flows through this exact strait. If this route were ever blocked or compromised, it would devastate the economies of nations thousands of miles away. So an alternative physical tunnel link isn't just a nice to have, it is considered an absolute necessity by the global community.
We've seen that human ingenuity can overcome raging ocean currents, soft clay seabeds, in extreme 800-meter underwater depths. But it begs the ultimate question, right? Before we can build a bridge or a tunnel of steel and concrete, can we build a bridge of trust? The technology exists, the 28-kilometer route is mapped out, and the funding is waiting. But until that diplomatic gap is bridged, Europe and Africa will remain separated, keeping the 14-kilometer mystery alive. That is all for today's Explainer. Thanks for diving in with us, and keep questioning the world around you.